So I'm going to get started. My name is Drew Bennett. I'm with the Office of Tech Transfer here at the University of Michigan. I wanted to thank Sean first and foremost for having us participate in the conference. I think it's fantastic. Anytime somebody says to me, you want to participate in a conference and it's called Positive Fill in the Blank, I'm kind of all in. So very happy to be here and very happy to be participating. I think it's going to be a great afternoon and obviously been a very, very strong morning already, so I think that's fantastic. First and foremost, thank you guys for coming. I think that's really important to recognize, obviously, time's a commodity that we all have, and I think it's very impressive that you all are willing to spend a day and a half trying to hopefully learn some things and spend a little bit of time here. So, with that in mind, really the goals here for the next 45 minutes or so are really to try and learn something, because I suspect for most people what I'm going to talk about is relatively new. Perhaps not. If it isn't, then you get to be the expert in your group and help out. It can be fun. This is not intended to be a difficult exercise. There really are right answers with respect to this process. We'll talk a little bit about that after lunch when we have the panel, because there's a bunch of different approaches to the process of moving your idea from an idea and a concept that you're very passionate about, that clearly is related to your research, through to execution from a technical standpoint. And the intention here is really to try and practice, to learn a bit about that process of doing that translation or that transition, if you will, from something that's a really good idea to something that actually gets executed in practice. And hopefully doing that in a way that's a little bit of fun and ends up with a good result. So we're going to talk about digital discovery, talk a little bit about value proposition design. That's really what most of the activity is around. We'll talk about tuning that up a little bit. I call it speed dating, for lack of a better description, but really what we're going to do tomorrow during the presentation side, when you come back and put your idea up in front of folks, is really to hopefully be able to do that eventually with lots of folks to say, what do you think of my idea? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? That's really the discovery process. It's a little bit of a minnow tank. I don't know how many people are Shark Tank watchers. I don't watch this show, but I hear about it all the time. Oh yeah, and I flip through the channels occasionally and I see this, and I'm like, but here's minnow tank. We'll take a couple of small nibbles at you just to help you out. Not really intended to make you feel bad. So my background is I've spent the last 23 years working in the computer software industry in various capacities in IT. I've been at the University of Michigan for about a year and a half. And that process to me has been very, very interesting. Been very illuminating 23 years working in the technology field. I started, I'm a very young looking gentleman, back in the days of Open VMS. I believe the green screens, if you will, thumb terminals, things of this nature. So if you recognize any of those terms, we probably have a lot to talk about. If you don't, that's fine too. You missed a lot of pain and agony with it. But when I started, I came out of school, and it was interesting to me that some of the first projects that I worked on, they had these really interesting names, and I was like, well, these things are clearly really, really, really important. They're based on some significant activity. I remember one of the first projects I worked on was called Heartbeat. I'm like, this must be absolutely critical. The thing is called Heartbeat. And as I started to work on it, I came to find this was the third time that somebody had tried to do this project called Heartbeat. And I said, well, what were the other two in front of it called? I said, well, they were called Heartbeat initially, and subsequently they've been called, defibrillator or AED, because they didn't work. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And as a very young, fairly naive person at the time, I'm like, well, that was interesting to me why they didn't work. So I kind of thought about that and went through the process and things of that nature and learned about it. I then worked on a couple of other projects, and I said to one of the folks on the project, the subsequent project that I was on, I said, can you tell me a little bit about what this is about? And the gentleman turned around and he reached in his bag and he handed me a book. He says, this is what this is about. I'm like, wow, they're actually writing something off of a book. The problem was, the book was entitled Death March. We'll talk a little bit about this tomorrow if you're really interested in background and history of IT and things that have gone on. But Death March is a book basically about being on failed technology projects and why they fail. It's a relatively old book at this point, but I'm like, Death March? Not good. So you start to get the theme here where things were starting to not line up all the time. There was really fundamentally a problem. So I started to learn a few roles about different people and things of that nature, and this role came up, well, there's this person called a business analyst. They basically come from the IT shop, and they talk to the business user, and they determine what the business user needs. And I'm like, well, how's that happen? Well, they analyze the situation and then tell them what they want. And that's the way it was expressed to me. They analyze the situation and then they tell the person what they want. I'm like, that doesn't really line up. You kind of need to ask the person who's building it what they're trying to do, right? But that's not really how it works. If they can't understand any of this stuff, it's extremely complicated, it's very difficult. This is how it works. They interview them and then we tell them what they want. Remember these words, we tell them what they want. So I kind of became fairly enamored with this. At this point in time, I started to work at a couple of startups, and the first company I worked for was a company called First Logic. Subsequently, the company was acquired by a small German software company called SAP, if you've ever heard of those guys. Inside joke what SAP was, there's the SAP way, and then there's every other way. Very, very large company. And I was working in the product group there, and the first time that SAP came to our company, after we had been around for a while, they said, here's how you write requirements. Here's how you determine what you want. And I will always remember this. The first thing in this really long set of documentation was, you shall write your requirements as an imperative statement. Okay, I'm not even sure what that is. And then comes the EG. Here's the examples. The system shall fill in the blank. Not I kind of wanted to do this, or this is kind of where I'm thinking, or no, the system shall do X. And that's the way they set it up. And the entire set of requirements for any particular product were written that way. The system shall do this, the system shall do this, the system shall do that. And that's the way every sentence started. I said, that doesn't really line up with the premise of what we're trying to do here. We're doing some interesting stuff. They're like, that's the way you're going to write it, or it's going to be rejected. About this time, there's a book that came out by a guy named Steve McConnell. Rex will remember this book. It was called Rapid Development. Steve McConnell was one of the first 20 guys at Microsoft. And this is probably late 90s, early 2000s. I would have to go back and look at the actual copyright on this book. McConnell basically said, stop. This doesn't make any sense. The way you're going about this doesn't make any sense. There's huge failure in this project. They continue to not deliver on the promise, which is you're going to have this great system that does X, Y, and Z. And to boil all that back, the fundamental thing that I would tell you McConnell came back to the user community with is he said, you kind of have to engage the user in a series of cycles because they really don't know what they want. And they'll know it when they see it, and it's a progressive process. I've met McConnell, and I think you'd say that was a fair assessment of kind of what his sentence is. It's rapid development. You don't try and do it all at once. Prior to that was write the imperative statement and deliver the tone to the IT people. Throw some pizzas and raw meat in the room and come back in 6 months. And we will tell you what you want. But we shall deliver what you want. So the promise was really basically bootstrapped. And from that point in time, I've really spent a fair bit of my career inside of product groups and inside of product management, product development. I ran my own company. Been involved with a bunch of startups. But I was always told that, you know, if you have great ideas, some great science, put it together with some coders, you're going to get fireworks, right? Something good's going to happen. But the reality on the ground was that very rarely happened. There's high levels of dissatisfaction. There's people who are frustrated. How many people went to their IT group and said, these are the greatest guys ever? Your guys' comment notwithstanding. This is a different day and age. Almost always contentious. They're a bunch of bums. They don't understand what we're trying to do, blah, 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 blah. lost. So the process was broken, and I sat there and said, this process is really, really not right. It's goofed up. It's really backwards. That was one of the E's. You're over here. Or I guess you're over here. All the technologists with the dark secret sauce behind the curtain, pay no attention to the wizard, are over there. And I'm like, we're just people, talk, hang out, tell people my notions of private property, personal space are probably different from most of you. I'm the last of 8 kids. So I'm used to the group hug. I'm like, just kind of talking about it, right? But the issue fundamentally boils back to, in my mind's eye, kind of trying to find a common language. It's like you're talking different things, and you can't hand somebody this book, walk away for 6 months, and expect anything good to happen. Great, great. Yeah, we'll see you in 6 months. Have a nice life. You don't have any questions, because I know I wrote it up perfectly. So if I'm you in that particular group, when I hear the technologist talk, I hear all this mumbo jumbo. Well, we're going to write this thing in C++. You're going to get a Hadoop cluster because you need this thing to scale. Blah blah blah. Multi-concurrent connections. Yada 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 blah blah blah. Your head's about ready to blow off. You're like, it's never going to. And you're right. And then all my great friends here in the back from CACR are going to tell you they don't know what they want. Charles Brown, right? Well, they came in here, their hair was on fire, they had 3 cocktail napkins, half a Word doc, and a pencil sketch that was on the back of a napkin that they used for some other purpose. So that's a communication problem, right? So I have to disclose this next section with a little bit of a, I know, I don't want to offend you. I've done this presentation a lot. Anybody here Dutch? I love you guys. You saw it, it's been recorded, it's been simulcast, who knows where. Anybody see my first slide? Yes. So for the Dutch people in the room, what did my first slide say? And Steve, I figured Steve, you were Dutch. I grew up on the other side of the state, very large Dutch community. I don't even remember it.
It said Spreken Nederlands.
Do you speak Dutch?
Yes.
Okay, so Anne, what are we looking at then? You know what we're looking at here? Is anybody familiar with something?
Tulips and some windmills.
But you know explicitly what this is. So here's my pitch for the Dutch National Tourism Society. This is actually called the Keukenhof. If you ever go to Holland in the spring, it is phenomenal. Look it up, find out what it is. It is unreal. Holland's pretty flat. It's actually a lot of it's below sea level. It's kind of an unusual country. But they have a large tulip festival, obviously, part of their heritage. And I don't know if that was 100% right, but they basically built a little hill because they didn't have apples. And all these farms around it are tulip farms. And you see for miles and miles and miles, it looks like that. But the brief story is this, and this is kind of the epiphany of this conversation, trying to find a common language. I had customers with one of my companies, a large set of customers in Europe. And we would go and visit them frequently, and one of those customers was a gentleman who's still a good friend of mine, named, as poetic as this is, his name was Hans, his name is Hans Monders, and he worked for a grocery store called Cada. So we did a lot of applications for loyalty applications for consumer grocery stores. So we did a Kroger card or an Albertsons card, Speedway, that stuff. We wrote all the stuff to track your entire transaction history. And I met Hans early on. Very nice guy, and I learned about some of the passions of the Dutch people, such as football. You really want to see somebody get fired up, talk about football in Dutch. They have a couple of painters of barbecue, I guess. And honestly, I was like, well, I'm kind of familiar with Dutch. We're Holland, shoes, windows, the Keukenhof, some painters, things of this nature. And for years, we would go over and we'd have dialogue with data, and we'd talk killed me. His English is better than mine. I'm really not the least bit of an accent. So I got to know him over a period of years, and I finally got up the courage with I have to ask this question. So it's been bothering me for a while. We've known each other for several years. So please don't take offense. Are you actually Dutch? And he looked at me like, you have like 3 heads. I said, I hate to ask that, but I said, are you really Dutch? And he's like, of course I'm Dutch. And then he looked, and I said, well, I have to be honest with you. It's just been something that's, I won't say bothered me. It's just a question I asked. Your English is phenomenal. And he goes, well, do you speak Dutch? I said, I don't speak English that well. I always try to learn a little language when I go someplace, at least to be able to say hello, how are you doing, things of this nature. I said, that's about the extent of my Dutch, to be able to say hello or thank you. And he goes, do you know anybody else who speaks Dutch? And I said, outside of when we come to either work with you guys, I really don't know anybody else who speaks Dutch. I said, I grew up outside of Kalamazoo, Michigan, and there's a lot of Dutch folks there, but I don't know. And he goes, well, do you know anybody who speaks Flemish? I don't know anybody who speaks Flemish. He goes, well, do you know anybody who speaks West Flemish? I said, well, the part that I didn't know anybody who spoke Flemish, probably first that goes, well, when you think of Holland, you think of this. I said, well, yeah. He says, you think of this country with some artists and tulips and windmills and things like this. And he goes, the reality is Holland is broken up into a bunch of different groups, and there's a lot of different dialects. And I'm actually from this very tiny place right here. And he goes, when I went to school, the very first thing that I learned was English. Because I didn't expect the world to come to me and speak West Flemish, because we know we're this very tiny little enclave that speaks West Flemish. Nobody else speaks that. I had to kind of try to figure out a way to talk to the rest of the world. What that said to me, years later, it kind of popped in my head. So that's the whole problem with this discovery thing is somebody's speaking West Flemish, and they're not going to move. So we kind of have to find a common language. And thus, really, my interest in the notion of this discovery process. Because the reality is for any application to fundamentally work and achieve the goals that you want and to deliver value, is you have to find a common language between yourself and the technologist. And I really believe it's about coming someplace in the middle. It's not necessarily about everybody learning to speak West Flemish or everybody else trying to speak English. It's we're going to speak some West Flemish English. And that's really fundamentally what it is. Success of a technical project does not become a function of that big set of eye charts. It's this particular technology, and it's this particular database, and it's this particular language we're writing in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It depends first on being able to describe that idea in a way that everybody who comes to that project, or you want to participate in it, understands it. And that's really the foundation of this discovery process. And I will tell you absolutely emphatically, none of this stuff is mine. It's not. It's stuff that's been brought together over a period of years. There's lots of great people participating in it. And the other thing is, there is more than one way to execute on this. And that's what you'll hear hopefully this afternoon. So when we have our friends from Logic Solutions, or friends from Marble Moon, and CHCR, or go on whole that, everybody takes a slightly different tack on it. But I will tell you, if you listen to what's being discussed, they'll have a really common set of 4 components that they really talk about. They'll talk a lot about the user. They'll talk a lot about understanding what the core value of what you're trying to do is. They'll try to talk to you about why is it important. And then the last part is, who cares? Who cares? Who's the person that cares about this? So the process that we developed here at the University of Michigan, because we're running into a lot of problems where people are saying, I want to build that. So the fine folks at Apple and the fine folks at Google have done a phenomenal job of convincing the world that the solution to all the problems are there's an app for that, right? Well, thanks to our mobile thing. But sometimes you're right, there is a mobile app that is for that. And it is absolutely a phenomenal platform, a great way to get reach and support all the things that you want to do that are really, really important. It is a way about it. But we ran into this problem where people kind of say, "How am I going to do an action?" And I'm kind of like, well, what do you want to do first? So we started this discovery process, which is, as the slide says, it's really idea formalization. It's fundamentally trying to take your cocktail napkin, your half-word docs, your pencil sketches, move it through a process collaboratively, bringing in the technologists so that we can understand right from the get-go what you're trying to achieve in plain language. Not much Flemish, not some unusual technical terms, but basically in a way that everybody can understand and appreciate. Does that make sense? I usually walk around with this mic is only here, so it's like everything I can do to just stay behind this podium, so that's all good. Why is he rocking back and forth? So we talk about this concept, really moving it from the cocktail napkins to something you can deliver. There are two critical conversations that you, as an investigator, are going to have. You have them all the time now. You might not formally recognize them, but there are two conversations that you're going to try and have. And really, the digital discovery process and the deliverables out of the back end of it are trying to enable you to do that in a super effective way. You are going to have a conversation with a sponsor. So everybody in this room who does research is familiar with this. You're going to talk to NIH, or you're going to talk to the mental health group, or you're going to talk to a funding agency here on campus, or you're going to talk to your dean, et cetera, et cetera. You are going to have to convince somebody who's going to write you a check what it is you're trying to do and why it's important. That's number one. Number two is you're then going to have to jump across that canyon, talk to some folks who are going to technically enable it, unless you're one of these folks, and I run into these conversations all the time here, which is one of the great parts of my job, where, I just taught myself Swift this weekend, and I wrote the app Sunday afternoon. If you're one of those people, this may not be necessary for you. I once had a conversation with someone when I first got here who had developed a fairly elaborate application in C++, and I said, well, how long have you been writing in C++? She goes, well, the application's about 2 months old, so about 9 weeks. And I looked at the PI, and I'm like, really? She goes, well, I did do a week of research to decide what the right language to learn. Unnoteworthy. So if you're that person, I want to talk to you. So 2 conversations. And there's really 3 questions. If you think about these 3 questions this afternoon when you're doing your group work, you're going to be in great shape. Because fundamentally, if you can explain these 3 questions well to both of those groups, you're going to end up with a really successful project. I've not seen anybody who spent the time to be able to answer these questions not be able to execute well. What problem are you trying to solve? And I would tell you, if you write down nothing else, you don't write down anything else today for the time that I'm sitting here talking to you, write this down. Get one of those label machines or something, take it to the front of whatever the project finder is that you go to all the time, and think about that. What are we trying to do here? What are we trying to do here? What problem are we trying to solve? If you keep coming back to that, you're going to ask yourself lots of great questions along the way, and you're going to develop a fairly elaborated set of requirements around what you're trying to achieve. Why does it matter? You're going to have to engage somebody at a level other than, I'm just doing it, you're paying me X dollars an hour, and I'm doing it. You can hire those people. But I've known Al Carpinelli from Logic for a long, long time, and I've known the guys at Everman for a long, long time. If you can get them engaged at an emotional level and want to be engaged at an emotional level, this is why this is important. The end product is different. I just guarantee it's different. This is why it matters, because it makes a difference for kids that we're trying to avoid suicide prevention, trying to help them out with that, people we're trying to engage with as far as well-being and mental health. Those are serious, significant, really important topics. You're not working on trivial stuff. I can assure you, I've worked on some really nutty stuff. I mean, I've been in companies where I kind of would go home at night and shake my head and go, I spend 1 hour here doing this for any variety of unusual things. And who cares? You want to draw a line between what you're trying to do and who that person is. So, it's a teenager who's going through normal stuff and challenges that you're trying to help keep from, contemplating suicide. Someone who has a significant mental health issue that's trying to actually operate in society and contribute in a way that they feel good about that makes a difference. You guys work on really good stuff. It's not like you have bad problems that you're trying to solve. So who cares? It makes a big difference to those folks. This is visual discovery process. It's a big eye chart. You guys can have this thing I will tell you. My little private advertisement is if you're here at the University of Michigan, I'll talk about this at the end, and you want to go through this process that we're going to describe and kind of continue on from what you're going to do in the next day and a half, find me, find a couple of my colleagues that I'll point out tomorrow. We'd love to help you out. But our process is very simple. You have an idea that you've developed. We have a quick form that we have you submit that idea on. Tell me what it is. We have a kickoff with you so that we didn't miss anything or misunderstand it. And then we work through this process on the far left-hand side of the chart. The first part is what we call concept hardening. And we operate from something that's called a value proposition canvas and user interviews. If you do anything that's entrepreneurial here at the University of Michigan, you are going to run into this. I can guarantee you're going to run into this. It is absolutely the core of the curriculum at CFE. It's the core of the curriculum that's being done through FFMI in the medical school. It's actually part of engineering's curriculum. The B school does this. It's a very, very simple approach, and you're going to go through it this afternoon. Value proposition in a nutshell is fundamentally, tell me the answers to those three questions I just showed you. There's a structured way of going about it. There's a little map. Don't get into the data that. We literally ask everybody who comes to us to go through this process, you need to talk to 10 people who are potentially your customers for the application you're trying to build. And not 10 of your buddies. So if you're doing an application that's for youth intervention, who are you talking to? You better be talking to youth. You better be talking to parents. You better be talking to mental health professionals who are working in conjunction with that. Don't call your colleague over across the hall and say, what do you think of this? Because they're going to say, you know what, I like it. You're really quick at it. Don't go to your boss and say, this is what I want to do. Because they're going to say, yes, I think that's fantastic. Can you write 6 grants on that? We would really like to see that happen. Right? You guys have a lot of different things you're trying to get to. You want to talk to people who are going to get you. After that, we will hold you there, I can assure you. You'll be holding on like a bus or a bus stop. Once you get that done, we kind of compile that together. We go through a process of wireframing and early counts. It's a visualization of your idea. You're going to hear me say this more times than you want to hear in the next 2 days. The digital discovery process does not do design, and we do not write code. Fred's going to talk a little bit about design or user-centered design, and some other people didn't hear that from. This is not design. This is concept hardening. You're trying to get your idea in a place where you can kind of operate from it. We then do a technical footprint, which is, what are you trying to do here? How does it work? We do a compliance and regulatory piece. We wrap that all up in what we call a workbook. We go through that with you and say, how close are we? If we've done it collaboratively the whole way, most people are participating in a pretty substantial technical background. You look at it, we make some modifications, we hand you the second one, off you go. You then can have those 2 conversations. Very clear. So real quickly, no coding, no design, not those things. If you look at the traditional development process, so this was pre-McConnell's rapid development book, so if you, I think actually you wrote another book called Code Complete, and this is in that book. If you read anything that's from about 2000 and in that has to do with anything from a technical development standpoint, they're going to tell you, you design, you then build it, you test it, you release it, and you maintain it. They're all going to tell you this. And that's not wrong. But we're just in front of it. You aren't anywhere near design because you don't even know what your idea is. The digital discovery process is everything on the other side. We're trying to explore your idea. I'm trying to understand it. It is very cheap to change your mind on paper. Take it 100 times, doesn't matter. You didn't commit hundreds of dollars to a technical resource. And I can assure you the people that you want to work with externally, they don't like to have you change your mind 20 times either. It's not particularly an effective use of their time either. So it's about refinement, hardening that thing, modifying it, adjusting it, doing all those things to try and surface what the core idea is that you want to do. Changing it on paper is absolutely dirt cheap on a relative basis. So concept hardening the embedded campus. This is what we're going to do today. I talked about this a little bit earlier. This book, The Business Model Generation, as I mentioned, is kind of a foundational approach that's used throughout the university to try to structure a business idea. At the end of the day, whether these are nonprofit, whether these are commercial ideas, etc., they do have the same value exchange. They actually have to serve a need for somebody to be successful. Whether somebody's paying for that as an end user or not, they have to meet that bar. And this canvas is a bunch of different grids, but fundamentally the thing we're going to work on over the next day are two parts of it. And this is what we do in the digital discovery process. We're going to work on what's called fit. It's this little chart here. And it's talking about your customer has a specific job that they're trying to do. There's something you're trying to accomplish. So if we go back to the example this morning, I'm trying to do an intervention or I'm trying to do some work with people that are potentially at risk of suicide. We're trying to work them through a process of understanding their current well-being and health, etc. That's the job we're trying to do. There are aspects, dimensions of that you're trying to execute on. How are you going to do that? On the other side, you're going to provide a product or a service. And fundamentally, that thing is going to achieve two ends. If you look at those other buckets, you can read them from there, probably not. It's in the back of your pamphlet if you want to pull out that 1 by 17. There are things called pains and pain relievers. There are things called gains. I believe it's gain elevators or gain creation. Your solution is going to do one of two things. It's either going to relieve a problem that somebody has, or it's going to create a really substantial benefit. You're trying to map those things together. That's why when you talk about fit, fundamentally those pieces. So, where are your customers? Where are they from? Stuff that's on the circle side of it. What value do you deliver to your customers? These are the basic questions. That's what I said. What is the fundamental problem you're trying to solve? Customer gains, customer gains. You guys can all read those things. There's things that people are going to benefit from, and there are things that are going to relieve some issue that somebody has. There's some difficulty with the current implementation. And then on the other side, going back to the gain creators, the most basic thing there is you're creating some type of savings. You're creating some type of benefit. You're doing something. I'm a little concerned about the word happy, because sometimes it isn't really about happiness, but you get the concept. That's the part to say, are you still with me? Ultimately, how well aligned those things are is really what's called fit. When you have really reasonably well aligned customer jobs being resolved or solved via your product or your solution, that's fit. When you're doing this, well, I solved one of their problems, but 3 of the other ones I'm going to miss. And how do you know that? Well, right back at the beginning, which is fundamentally, you have to talk to your customers. You have to talk to your customers. So really, it's basically a proposition. It's a theory. There's a lot of words that are used around this. I like to use the term proposition. You're basically, under a belief system, you have a theory that you're presenting to somebody, and you want to consider, does this really solve your problem? I'm a fairly basic person. I grew up in the farm country. This is the reason you need to talk to your customers. You're all very smart. You're gifted. You work on important topics, but you're not your customer. You don't write checks to yourself. You don't use your tools the way that your customers do. What they think and how they interact with it is critically important. I can't stress this enough. But I'll give you a little break. It's mostly irrelevant. Don't forget customers and users, because those are the people that you're trying to help, right? Don't forget themselves. So, one of the things you're ultimately going to get to tomorrow for a little minnow tank is you're going to do this. You're fundamentally going to be able to stand up here proudly in front of your co-conference attendees and give your little pitch. We're going to hold you in 5 minutes, so hopefully you You guys have all this in the book, that way, so I'll refer it down. That's a bunch of talk, so what's an example? So we'll leave that there.
So I apologize for that, but the digital discovery process helps faculty develop products and services or solutions by helping to shape those ideas,
Fundamentally speeding up the process. When we talk about digital discovery, that's what we're talking about. Apologize for what's going on here. This is a tuning process. You're not going to get it right the first time. Absolutely guarantee you're not. You're going to do it multiple times. That's the way it works. So I encourage people to do one thing when you start through this process. Save the first one. Take it. Save it. Send it out someplace where you're going to see it a lot. And you will have a lot of fun and interesting kind of perspective on that over time as you continue to work with it. Because it will change. It will evolve. It will iterate. It will become more refined. It will become different. And the target that you started with, especially your own perspective, we're not talking to any customers the next day, will be a little bit different. After you get that done, you got to do speed dating. You got to take the people and say, what do you think? So the people who are potentially the ones who are going to use it, what do you think of this? Does it make sense? Does it add up to you? Did I miss something? What parts are not there? The second, one of the things that's in the back of this folder, so I'm not sure what questions to ask Drew. I'm really kind of uncomfortable. Is this leverage chart, which is everything that we just talked about? I don't know what to ask. Cheat sheet is all the questions you want to ask. At least they're fire starters, right? And they're by grouping. So if you're really not sure, you want to sit down with somebody, you can ask these questions. They're mapped out that are very, very specific. So we're going to be using those things this afternoon. But you really want to get into that, for lack of a better description, speed dating. Talk to people about what you're proposing. Talk about these pieces, really just reinforcing this. What are we trying to do? A wireframe and a rough comp inside the discovery process, after that value proposition is finished, is fundamentally to create a basic understanding. We have time at the back end of tomorrow's session. There's some open wireframe sketches. You can sketch that out. I will tell you that my colleague Jessica laughs about this all the time. She'll come in my office. I have a question about blah, blah, blah. I am totally a picture person. Completely. You haven't figured it out yet, right? I'm a picture person. I have this blah, blah, blah question. Well, the first thing that happens is I go with this, and I go with this. In this drawer, I have a bunch of blank paper, and in another drawer, I pull out some markers. Don't be afraid to do that. Go back to your inner child and learn to draw again. Hugely beneficial. Not because you're going to get it perfect, you're not, but you would be amazed. That old adage of a picture is worth 1,000 words is an old adage because it actually is true. I never do it that way. That's usually what you're going to get. I never do it. Why would you do that? Oh, I didn't think about it. But you would have never had that conversation if you didn't put your little pencil sketch in front of somebody. So it's a foundation. I will tell you, everything we do, the other stuff is very, very important. The value proposition is particularly important. This is the part where people get all, really excited because it feels real. It's a really good way to get people foundationally excited about what you're doing. The technical footprint, I've had, unfortunately, several conversations since I've gotten here where somebody came in, well, we wrote this thing this way, and now we want to put it out to, clinical trial where 5,000 people in it. Can't do it. It keeps breaking. You're not going to be as familiar with this, but your technical partners are. And fundamentally, what the technical footprint is trying to do is to help you ask some very basic questions about scalability of your application based on what you're asking to do. And I use my little pictures for a reason. I always tell people, are you trying to build a shoebox, a house, or a skyscraper? Because they're way different. Way different. Me writing up my little Ruby application and getting that to work at the shoebox level, absolutely no problem. Running it at the house level, not a problem. Me trying to run a skyscraper off of it, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Also gives you some sense of effort, because when you have that conversation about your sponsor, they're going to basically come back and say, how long is this going to take? How much effort's involved? What are the resources? A little bit there. that's what the technical footprint is trying to provide. Compliance and regulatory. We've become very popular every day because that office tech transfer, we're the last gateway before you publish a mobile app under the University of Michigan County. So if you're branding it as the University of Michigan, and you're going to publish it through our office, guess what? You get a stop at our office. We have lots of friends who are at the IRB, and we have lots of friends who are really interested in things like HIPAA. We have lots of other friends who are interested in things like security and PHI and things of that nature. All important stuff. Not intended to stop you at all. Just important things to consider. Better to do it up front than on the back end where somebody says, sorry, you can't publish your application because, fill in blank, you have one of these problems. Or, worse yet, I work with tons of attorneys, hopefully there's no attorneys in here. They may stop you. Did I tell you guys this yet? So that's the process again. Those are the two deliverables we give you. And the last part of my advertisement is, this is not a cost to you if you're a faculty person or a staff person. We work you through it. Generally takes between 4 and 12 weeks, just so you have some sense of timing versus the 3 hours that you're going to spend on the first part or the next day. And it takes engagement. You got to be willing to talk to customers. If you're not willing to talk to customers, I'm going to tell you that you're going to think that we're mean, because we're going to tell you you're willing to talk to customers, we won't take you through this process. The benefits are tremendous, and we'll talk a little bit tomorrow. My good friend and colleague Sachin is going to talk about an example hopefully tomorrow to show you how some of these things work from the benefit side. So with that said, I'm willing to answer any questions for a little bit, and then we're going to talk about kind of the lunch. But if there are questions, I'm happy to try and deal with those. Yes?
Yeah, do you have tips for how people should talk to their potential customers and kind of questions they should be asking?
My short answer is, I think you have to find a dialogue point that's comfortable for you to start. I think there's lots of great reference material. Most of the stuff, as I mentioned, comes from a thing called value proposition design. Anybody who wants to see this book, I've got it with me. It's a great resource. It isn't the only way, but it creates a good structure. I think you have to start with something like that so that you at least are trying to map it into a basic idea, and then see how it goes. You're going to learn the questions that resonate for one reason or another, or the way you say them in your language. My best advice is write that down, because you're saying something that really hits home. It makes sense to people, and I think people miss this a lot, and they want to move on to something else, so they want to totally default on, well, I'm just going to read those questions off that big 11 by 17. So it has to be in your voice. I will tell you that we've had several people go through this process who did something that I didn't think about, and it was wonderful for them. It's a wonderful asset after the fact. They basically asked the person to talk to you, are you willing to let me record this conversation? Took their phone, put it on the middle of the table, and they recorded it. And then they could go back and say, well, what did they say? Did I get it right? Versus vigorously trying to write notes out. I think that's a great way to do two things. One, to make sure you capture it. B, it's the way to help you improve the interviewing process. No one fails or not. I think my biggest advice is it has to be in your own voice. These tools are great. They're wonderful. They're great resources. They're very impactful. The structure is great. You have to figure out a way to ask those questions as well. Anybody else? Yes?
What do you think about lean or agile development for like kind of interventions that follow research pathways and guidelines? So like the research timeframe tends to be a bit longer than.
So the question was, what do you think about lean or agile development methods as they relate to a research project? Is that characterized correctly? I will tell you that I've been doing some version of rapid or agile since about 2000. I wouldn't develop anything differently than that. For people who are not familiar with this, agile or lean development process is fundamentally a very iterative approach, much like what was talked about here, where it's you're not trying to deliver the free reminder to somebody. You're fundamentally trying to learn and adjust on the fly as you go along. Because the reality is, you're going to be getting feedback from people and you're gonna have to make an adjustment. Despite any legwork you did on the front end, things are different when they meet the marketplace. All plans are great till they meet reality. Fundamentally, I can't stand up there and tell you I would support any other approach because I just don't think it works. I had the misfortune to the earlier part of my conversation of the heartbeat projects, the blah, blah, blah projects. I've already lived through all that. It doesn't work. It probably never worked. People just accepted really bad software, really bad implementations because they weren't in a position to change dialogue. We're in a much more enlightened approach as far as I'm concerned between IT and their customers at this point. We should take full advantage of it. And it is iterative by nature. It is. The faster you do that, the better. The whole notion of the business model canvas and value proposition canvas operates off of a very basic premise called a minimal viable product. You'll hear people say this all the time: MVP, MVP, MVP. It's not most valuable player, it's a minimal viable product. What's the smallest thing you can put out in the market and have somebody actually be able to get some basic benefit from it? Could not encourage it more. The rest of the stuff tends to be gold plated. Who thinks somebody wants this? I'm going to ask you, how many people here use the Avery 6137 label in mail merge on Word? How many of you? You use it?
I don't know, maybe not.
You use it, yeah. I use it. 6137? Really?
Maybe.
You're the first. I better sit down. I'm going to have a stroke.
I'll use it now.
Yeah. I mean, you look at Word and I sit there and kind of go, can't you just simplify this thing? I mean, these menus are insane. They're crazy. Most of that stuff is going to, I don't even believe it's 20% of the population. 10%. So there's a point where the overhead is really expensive to the users. So I can't remember what the question was now.
Yeah, not exactly what I was asking. So, we've been talking a lot, or like the previous speakers have been talking a lot about like kind of clinical trials and like where there is an intervention and there are like people who have the intervention assigned to them. But how do you do lean if you have to have an intervention? Because a lot of lean is like you change the intervention.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to tell you that from a science standpoint, I'm the right person to answer your question from that side, because I'm absolutely not. As a developer, as a product person, my thing is any product schedule that you have that deploys something into the marketplace that doesn't have a checkpoint for an adjustment is fundamentally flawed. How you integrate that into the research piece, I think is a great question, something I certainly can learn about the next day.
I need to speak just a little bit about this, which is from my experiences, but I think it's better to do that before you do your intervention. Just do that whole process and hear the users first, make changes based on what they say, and then test your intervention. If you test it, the intervention should be a test of whether users like it. We should already know that they do, and it should be a test of whether it's effective.
I think there was another question or wrap up on chess.
Drew, how do you quantify what you learned from your interviews that you talk with different customers or have different opinions? How do you like converge them into something that you want to go in as a straight direction?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I tell you, the first metric to me is volume, because all you're basically trying to do is reduce uncertainty. So you have to have a lot of conversations. That's number one. So my quantification, my first thing is how many interviews have you had? You've already heard this based on, I believe, I2I or other programs you participated in. The National Science Foundation runs a program called I-Core that uses the business model canvas. Their minimum requirement for a participant in I-Core is 100 user interviews. You have to do 100 of them. And this is my two-part answer to your question. Number one is you will see things surface. If you're objectively looking at the answers that you're getting, you will see things that surface out, and you're going to try and aggregate the things. If you're having trouble with that at all, go to any text analysis tool, take all your interviews, so a tag cloud, clustering type tool, throw them all in there, run it, and see what comes out. I guarantee it's going to point you in the right direction. Because there are certain words or there are certain aspects of it that will continue to show up that may not be apparent to you. You just maybe get a little bit of scotoma because you're so close to it. If you do that, something that you didn't think about is going to happen. And that's a very objective quantification of those results. So I apologize, we've got to get rolling.